He was the man who turned a backward, war-torn nation into a global superpower. He built the world's largest army, industrialized the continent, and developed nuclear weapons, all in just a few decades. Yet his legacy is not one of glory, but of a terror that stained the earth with the blood of millions. This is the paradox of Joseph Stalin. The West remembers him as a monster, a dictator responsible for the deaths of countless people. That story is certainly true. From the brutal purges that eliminated his rivals to the engineered famines that starved millions to death, Stalin ruled through fear. And while the staggering figures of those lost are often debated, the scale of suffering is undeniable. But there is another side to the story. Under Stalin's iron grip, a nation once defined by its agrarian past became a military and industrial titan. The average life expectancy of the Soviet citizen more than doubled. He was a ruthless politician, a tireless worker, and a patient, long-term planner. His ambition was boundless, and his vision was for a powerful Soviet state, a vision he achieved, no matter the human cost. 70 years after his death, we can look beyond the emotion and propaganda. This is not a story of a hero or a villain, but of a leader of astonishing, brutal complexity. This is the story of Joseph Stalin. His name was not Stalin. He was born Joseph Zhugashvili in the small town of Gori, Georgia, a remote corner of the vast Tsarist Empire. His childhood, while marked by struggle, was typical for the time and place. His father, a shoemaker, had a business in decline and was known for his abusive drinking. Many have tried to psychoanalyze Stalin's later cruelty through the lens of this difficult childhood, but such attempts often fail to grasp the harsh reality of 19th century life, where poverty and domestic violence were tragically common. For a Georgian boy of his era, Stalin's early years were more or less an average experience. His life was soon shaped by misfortune. At age 7, he contracted smallpox, which left him with lifelong facial scars. Just a few years later, a carriage accident left his arm permanently disabled. Ironically, his future seemed destined for the church. He was a bright student at the Tiflis Theological Seminary, where his intellect earned him good grades. As a teenager, he wrote poetry using the pseudonym Sesolo. His verses, often romantic in nature and dedicated to subjects like violets, gained some recognition, with some of his poems becoming minor Georgian classics that were memorized by many. But his interest soon shifted from theology and poetry to revolution. In the pages of Karl Marx's Das Kapital, he discovered a new philosophy that would consume his life. Young Zhugashvili quickly became a dedicated communist revolutionary. In Tsarist Russia, this was considered a treasonous act. He was arrested for the first time in 1902 and exiled to Siberia. This set a pattern for the next decade, a cycle of arrests, escapes from frozen exile, and a return to the work of revolution. He earned a reputation for his ruthlessness and practicality, organizing bank robberies to fund the Bolsheviks and solving problems with brutal efficiency. While the party's intellectual leaders engaged in endless theoretical debates, Stalin was in the streets getting things done. He was a valuable asset, and the future ruler of Russia was quietly forging a new identity: Stalin, the man of steel. The communists finally took power in the October Revolution of 1917. While perceived intellectual giants like Leon Trotsky took the spotlight, Stalin remained a key figure behind the scenes. He was often looked down upon by the party's educated elite for his lack of formal schooling and his gruff manner. Their arrogance, however, was a mistake. While they debated philosophy, Stalin was the one who could be counted on to solve the practical problems of a revolution in chaos. The path to absolute power opened when Vladimir Lenin fell ill in 1922. As Lenin's health declined, Stalin, the party's general secretary, meticulously took control of the Soviet state's day-to-day operations. When Lenin died in 1924, Stalin was in a position to consolidate his power, a process he would execute with brutal, systematic precision over the next several years, eliminating every rival. This is the story of how an average boy from a small Georgian town became the undisputed leader of the world's largest country. A man whose later actions would shape the destiny of millions. Now, let's begin to understand the complex portrait of the man and the motives behind his rule. Stalin was, first and foremost, a man consumed by an insatiable ambition. His entire life, from his days as a revolutionary to his time as a leader, was a relentless march toward one goal: absolute power. He was a master of political maneuvering, always planning 3 steps ahead, never settling for a subordinate role. His ambition was not just for himself, but for the Soviet Union he envisioned, a nation of unparalleled strength and influence. He was also a man of formidable intelligence, far from the simple, uneducated man his rivals sometimes perceived him to be. Stalin possessed a sharp, strategic mind and a photographic memory. He was a voracious reader, a self-taught intellectual who could master complex theories and outthink his opponents. This intelligence was the engine of his ambition, allowing him to anticipate threats and consolidate his power with a chilling level of precision. Finally, Stalin was a true believer in communism. He genuinely embraced the vision of a classless society and the ultimate victory over capitalism. But his personal ambition twisted this ideology. In his hands, Marxism-Leninism became less of a guiding philosophy and more of a weapon, a means to an end. He adapted the ideology to justify his brutal policies, including the forced collectivization and the rapid, costly industrialization of the Soviet Union. These 3 traits, ambition, intelligence, and a rigid, unyielding belief in his own version of communism, are the key to understanding everything he did. His ambition fueled his desire to transform a backward nation into a developed superpower, while his intelligence provided the means to do it. Yet, the same ambition, when coupled with his absolute conviction, meant that no human cost was too high. He was relentless in eliminating any perceived threat to his authority, whether it was a political rival, a potential dissenter, or even his own trusted allies. In Stalin's mind, the ends of communist progress always justified the means of human suffering. Joseph Stalin's rule from the 1920s to 1953 transformed the Soviet Union through a blend of strategic brilliance and unrelenting ruthlessness. To understand Stalin's legacy is to recognize the 2 conflicting truths of his reign: the bad, defined by terror and mass death, and the good, embodied by the Soviet Union's rise to superpower status. The most striking aspect of Stalin's rule was his systematic use of terror to consolidate and maintain power. He did not simply eliminate his rivals, he created an atmosphere of fear that paralyzed the entire society. This era of repression, known as the Great Purge, saw millions of people arrested, imprisoned in labor camps, or summarily executed on often fabricated charges of being enemies of the people. The scale of this violence was immense. While exact numbers are debated, historians, using declassified Soviet archives, estimate that hundreds of thousands were executed, with millions more dying from starvation, disease, and forced labor in the Gulag. Beyond direct executions, Stalin's policies led to mass death on an unimaginable scale through indirect means. The forced collectivization of agriculture, intended to modernize the Soviet economy, was met with fierce resistance from the peasantry. In response, Stalin's government imposed impossibly high grain quotas and confiscated food, leading to a devastating famine from 1930 to 1933. This famine, known as the Holodomor in Ukraine, resulted in the deaths of millions in Ukraine, the Russian Kuban, Western Siberia, and Kazakhstan. Stalin's paranoia also fueled a cycle of purges that ensured his absolute authority. He routinely brought new waves of leaders to replace those he killed or imprisoned, preventing anyone from building a base of power that could challenge him. The military leadership was particularly devastated, with a significant portion of its most experienced officers purged on the eve of World War II. This style of rule, built on a foundation of terror, removed any semblance of political dissent and left a legacy of fear and mistrust that lingered for generations. Despite the immense human cost, Stalin's rule saw the Soviet Union undergo a breathtaking transformation. When he took power, Russia was a largely agrarian country still recovering from civil war. By the time of his death, the Soviet Union had become a global superpower with a formidable military and nuclear weapons. This was a direct result of his ambitious and ruthless industrialization policies. The 5-year plans transformed the country's economy, focusing on heavy industry, steel production, and infrastructure development. The Soviet Union's industrial output soared, turning it into a major economic and military force capable of withstanding and ultimately defeating Nazi Germany. This achievement cemented its place on the world stage and created a new geopolitical order. Also, a closer look at social statistics reveals a complex picture of progress alongside immense suffering. While millions died in famines and purges, the average Soviet citizen's life expectancy improved dramatically. In the 1920s, life expectancy was around 23 years due to the lingering effects of war and famine. By 1953, this figure had risen to an estimated 64 years. This astonishing increase was driven by public health initiatives, the eradication of major diseases, and the creation of a universal, state-sponsored healthcare system. Literacy rates also improved significantly from under 50% to nearly 90%, and access to basic education expanded throughout the country. In conclusion, Stalin's legacy is a testament to the idea that a single individual can change the course of history through sheer will, for better or for worse. He was the great architect of a modern state and a mass murderer of his own people. The strengths of his leadership, his foresight, ambition, and tenacity were inseparable from his flaws, his paranoia, cruelty, and utter disregard for human life. The Soviet Union's rise to global power cannot be discussed without acknowledging the rivers of blood on which it was built, making Stalin one of the most compelling and terrifying figures of the 20th century.